Okay, so we move on to the next paper then, which is Michèle Friend, and her paper is titled Comparing Production of Biofuel to Oil. Michèle, you want to share your, and again, I will notify you when we have 5 minutes of your talk left, and then, so in about 15 minutes.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button. Okay, so thank you very much for organizing this conference, and we're all now virtually in Buenos Aires, which is very nice, I hope. And this talk will in some ways be a fairly light talk. It's not a very technical talk. And it's due to some work that I've been doing with Yaman Abdin, who I've borrowed from Klaus, he's visiting me for a little while in Hauts-de-France, and we've made what we call an institutional compass for Hauts-de-France. And we're going to superimpose upon that compass the idea of biofuels. So I guess I can go to the next slide, right? How do I go to the next slide? How do I do that? Oh, there, down there. Okay, sorry. So the order of go for this talk will be, I'll give you an idea about the institutional compass, which I introduced a number of years ago, and now the thinking is sort of completed, and I've got a book under review at the moment on this conception. Then we'll construct what we call a wish compass. Then we give a regional compass, which is what is going on today, you know, in the region of Hauts-de-France. And I start to decompose it. I start to show what lies behind this. And one of the things that lies behind it are three sub-compasses. And then we go to the tables of data that are used to construct the compasses. And I'll explain a little bit about the data analysis because it's non-standard. And then after that, we use this compass idea in order to sort of do futures modeling or to help with policy decision-making. So we envisage a scenario where the regional government decides that they want to convert to biofuel and replace the existing fossil fuels 100% biofuel, as an example. And then we look at what the result is, and we draw some conclusions. So let me show you what the institutional compass looks like. So as you can see, there are three general qualities. We have the quality of harmony, where everything is going well, it's easy, it's light. It might be a little bit boring, but it's a sort of post office job. You know, this is just, you know, I do this, I do that. It all goes fairly seamlessly. It's very automatic. You know, there's no discussion. It's just, you know, life as it normally is for, or usually should be normally for most people. Another quality is excitement, where everything is very, very bling bling, and colorful, and a little bit chaotic, a little bit surprising, maybe a little bit alarming, quite passionate, very emotional. And the third one is discipline. I'm calling it discipline. I used to call it suppression, but and discipline is when you find that there are challenges, there are hardships, there are rules, and there's sickness, there's death, the things that remind us that we have to go forward. And each institution, each object, each person has one of these that probably predominates, and we need all three. We need some harmony in our lives, we need some excitement in our lives, and we need some discipline in our lives. We need to get our act together sometimes. And different periods in our lives or in the lives of an institution, again, there'll be times when it needs a little bit more discipline. They have to get their act together and just crack down. And other times when things are very exciting, but one has to also calm down and go back to harmony. So these are not negative and positive. They're negative and positive relative to the situation you find yourself in. So there's times when the discipline is really necessary, even if it's painful or it's not very nice. So So they're not, again, I really want to emphasize that they're not good, neutral, bad, but they are different things in different contexts. And we analyze data in these terms. So I'll go to the next slide. When we're making a regional compass, so we had the region of Hauts-de-France, we construct what we call a wish compass. And we look at the texts of the politicians and of the people in Hauts-de-France and of the newspapers and so on. And we ask the question, it's a philosophical armchair question. We sit in our little chairs and we ask the question, where does the region of Hauts-de-France want to go? Where would it like to situate itself? Hauts-de-France happens to be the poorest area in the whole of France. The water system is very polluted. It's a very agricultural area. It was sort of forgotten in the last monetary revolution, that's why it's poor. And there's a big effort by central government in France to reinvigorate the place, to attract young people, they've unified 3 universities into one, and there's a cité universitaire, which was started in the 1960s, but it's very active. There's a sort of hub of excellence, as they call it. So they're trying to re-dynamize, make the place more dynamic again, and reinvigorate the area. Now here we have the actual compass compared to where we wish to go. So the blue circle again is where Hauts-de-France wants to go. And we discovered that really it's actually going in the wrong direction altogether, right? But this might be relatively better than what it was before, because there has been some investment fairly recently, but the investment has not really been enough, and maybe it hasn't really come to maturity. So what we would like to see is for that arrow to start shrinking or turning more towards that blue circle. And the compass is based on data on the environment, and data on the environment has to do with how much of the area's natural spaces, and we find that there's actually not very much natural space in Hauts-de-France. But there's a lot of agricultural space. And so when we control nature, we place the data, the amount of the natural space that is controlled by us, we place that in excitement, because that shows our control over nature. Polluted areas, places where nature is starting to collapse, where there's loss of biodiversity, that belongs to discipline. So that's one part of the compass. Another part is sociopolitics, and that will include information about culture, about education, about health, about security, and about infrastructure. So all of these will have some component which would indicate harmony, certain types of things that would indicate excitement, and some that would indicate discipline within, say, security, within education, within culture, within security. I won't go into the details right now. And another component is economics. So investment really belongs in excitement, because we're injecting money and it's risky, right? The investment might fail. It might produce almost nothing. It might produce something very good. So the degree of risk has to do with where we would situate the arrow within excitement. If we have failures and bankruptcy and people not living very well, or institutions that are not doing very well, then the arrow, then we're talking about discipline. So this is the spur that forces people to pull themselves together and reinvest in the economy, or retry to gain the economy. And harmony has to do with all the fixed prices, all the steady prices, all the things that don't move around very much. So let's now break up the compasses into the 3 ones. So we have, so as I said, that last compass that we saw, unfortunately I can't go back because, anyway, it's a long story. But the last compass that we saw was a resolution of the 3 compasses that we're about to see. So this is the environmental compass for Hauts-de-France. And as I said, it has to do with the natural spaces, which would bring the arrow towards harmony. And what we find is that the arrow is in discipline and it's towards excitement. The reason for this is that almost all of the waterways are heavily polluted. There's not very much natural space. The coastal area in Hauts-de-France is very built up, so that disrupts the natural ecosystems that are quite delicate in that area. And it's heavily agricultural, which is why it brings it towards excitement, because we're controlling a lot of the land, we're controlling a lot of the natural scape. We move to the sociopolitical compass, and we see a very different picture. So we found this very interesting when we were constructing the compass, that the three different ideas have actually very different outcomes. And we see that the arrow actually lands in the wish area, which means that sociopolitically it's not too bad. There's a lot of museums, there's a lot of activity, education is very high, it's very good. And there are some protests, there's some security problems, but they're not too bad compared to the rest of France. So, and health is pretty good as compared to the rest of France. There's some very major hospitals and so on. So basically, sociopolitically, compared to the rest of France, is not doing too badly. We move to the economic compass, and there we see a very different picture again. So again, there's been some investment in Hauts-de-France, but things are fairly steady, so it's towards harmony. So when the arrow is in harmony just on the other side, it's sort of boring, you know, there's not too much activity going on. And as I said, there's been some heavy investment in the area, but it's not all that much, it's not making that much of a difference. What we might find is that compared to, and some of our data might be a little bit too old, right? So we might find that arrow starts to shrink and starts to move more towards excitement as more investment attracts more investment, you see. So these are the three compasses that made up the first compass that you saw.
Sorry, excuse me, 5 minutes.
Okay, and then we have table of data. Now, the only thing to realize about the table of data is that, first of all, they're quite big. This is a fraction. And we first of all decide on the general quality for the data. Then we give a name for it, and we can, the nice thing about the compass is you can include all kinds of different data. So if somebody says, hey, you know, you missed this thing out, we can put it into the table. And then for each data point, we decide on a degree. And this takes a long philosophical discussion, as it turns out. And we also have to decide on a length, and the length of the data point has to do with what is normal and what are the extremes in, you know, what would be the maximum, what would be the envisaged minimum. And that's a fairly regular statistical technique. The degree is the most subjective part of the compass. And we make a table for social data, and we make a table for economic data. As you'll see, some things are crossed out. This is because the length is very small, and so we consider it insignificant. And it's not used in the calculation for the compass. So now we're going to move to the new scenario. So we're going to imagine a regional government's decision that by law throughout the region of Hauts-de-France, customers only have access to biofuel and petrol stations. So this will change the data concerning at least local CO2 emissions, but also in terms of use of biomass, crop yields, and agricultural waste. So some biofuel is made out of sugar type agricultural products. Some of it is made out of biomass. That's sort of just waste. But we want to think about what are the repercussions. And there are all kinds of different repercussions, and we would add those to the tables. So we take these and other matters into account, adding estimates to the table, and we get the following compass. So now we have the black arrow is normal, how things are going right now. And the green arrow, we see a big shift when we add biofuel to the region.
Sorry, we have to mute, please.
Please mute.
I try.
Okay, I think that's done. All right, so we see that there's a difference between the two arrows, if you were to impose biofuel mass, but they're both quite far away from the wish area. So, so then we have a question about whether or not it's worth it to invest in biofuel, to make this decision to convert all of the fuel that's available in Hauts-de-France into biofuel. Is this really a wise decision to make? So this is a way of answering that question. Maybe it's not worth doing this just at the moment, or maybe we want to look at this in more detail. It's not clear from what the compass tells us. So is it the lesser of two evils? I don't know, because as we know also when biofuel is burnt up, it emits other sorts of gases into the atmosphere, and some of them are quite toxic. So in conclusion, research in applied chemistry with the intention of being implemented at industrial scale. So this is just applied chemistry. I'm not talking about pure chemistry. This has to be done responsibly. We just can't afford anymore to be making poor decisions. We can't just let the market system sort it out. We've collectively made far too much of a mess of our planet. Because our responsibility extends not only to the economy, but also to society and the natural environment. And this is a deep and difficult philosophical matter because we're weighing incommensurable factors, and also because there'll be different regional cultural tolerations, right? Some regions might be more excited about helping the environment, and others will be more excited about helping society. Others will be still convinced that the economy is going to lead society into a better place, and that will naturally just bring the environment into a better place, because there are arguments to this effect. And it will depend on the culture, and it will depend on where they find themselves. The decision to encourage research to invest in chemical processes at an industrial scale can be made more or less wisely by considering the many factors and aggregating them in an institutional compass. We can make wiser decisions. And the immediate concrete suggestion is to engage in compass exercises early on in the scientific research to find out two things. In what areas would it, regional areas, geographical areas, political areas, would it be better to implement at industrial scale this particular chemical process, and maybe in what mix with other sorts of processes. So this is what I mean by making a wise decision, is that there's going to be regional and cultural sensitivities. It's going to be appropriate to insert biofuel in some areas. It's going to be inappropriate in other areas. And this is what I consider to be a wise decision. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Michèle. This is a very interesting talk. The first question is from Olympia Lombardi.
Thank you, Michèle. Very interesting. And my question is, when you consider the introduction of a chemical process and you assess you want to assess such a move, taking into account the consequences. My question is if the consequences are considered only for the region you were considering, for instance, or if you are considering also more general and global possible consequence of, because, perhaps it's good for the region, but not globally good.
Very good, very good. This is a deep philosophical issue, and that's debated right? So that is something that when you write up an analysis based on a compass, that is the sort of thing we would mention. So we might even say, look, this will end up, we will have to start importing sugarcane from Brazil in order to make the biofuel in Hauts-de-France, and that importation of sugarcane from Brazil is going to cause a lot of problems with, you know, CO2 emissions or whatever. So yes, all of these things are raised, and a decision is then made with the group that are making the compass. And by the way, the compass can be made more or less democratic too. So whatever group it is that is doing the data analysis and constructing a compass, they have to be fairly explicit about how they made those decisions. And so then they're kind of responsible for the repercussions as well. So it's a bit subversive.
Thank you. The next person, I see that Farshad, but Julio had his hand before Farshad. So Julio, if you have a question.
Yeah, it seems to me that you have found once again the answer that this solution is great, but not in my backyard. And many environmental solutions end up under this mark. See, it's a very good solution technically, but not here, please. And if we all go this way, then we keep doing exactly what we are doing, and that's maybe it's the worst solution there is.
Yes, thank you. Very much to the point is that we have to, I think, you know, now we have to sort of face what's going on. And this ties to Olympia's question too. What are the effects on a large, you know, outside my backyard? What are the effects? And are they going to come back and bite me afterwards or not? Can I really contain this, or can I supplement it? And sometimes, you know, we hope to find a technological solution, but it's not going to be simple, and we have to make very difficult decisions between things. And it's not clear that the biofuel right now in every region is going to be the right solution. So it's very delicate.
And if I can add one more point, importing biofuels seems to be a great solution for this region. And if there are problems with this solution, there are not environmental problems. The problems have to do with economic subsidies to European farmers. So.
Right, good. Because I was envisaging making all of the biofuel locally, right? So that was the scenario that we had. We had sort of models of different scales of industry, but it would all be local. And it might be the compass might look very different if we thought in terms of importing biofuel from somewhere else. That's not something that we looked at, so I don't know.
Thank you. Next question is from Farsad.
Okay. Again, excitement. I mean, your talk, not me. The excitement that I felt hearing this was, A, it's visual and that really communicates well. And then B, I mean, well, there's B through Z or whatever, there's what it all kind of boiled down to me in terms of Julio's question too, regarding the backyard thing. It reminded me of the same question I asked Clevis about the global, all those different styles of thinking, all those interpretive communities. Can they come together? Is there such a thing, or does it not apply? And in your case, I thought this is a great way to map that same conversation, because here on the global scale, we want this in our neighborhood. You know, we want the whole thing solved in one way or another. But on the local scale, that same solution, you know, has to touch ground somewhere. These interventions in global climate change have to be someplace. And at that place, it'll be a, no, we don't want that in our neighborhood on the same solution. So it's, I mean, I think that's a really good example to show how I mean, not us to show, but this compass can show where the conflicts arise very clearly. And that is its chief first function. Whether it can help solve those things, it could, but in a different way. But at the very first, it just is a great monitor to say, here's exactly where your problems are going to show up.
Right, good, thank you. Yeah, it is a way of also anticipating conflict. It's a way of anticipating disagreement, and it can be used as a mediation tool. Because as you said, it's visual, it's very intuitive. I even have a version of it where there's no words on it. It's just the colors, you know, and then you just sort of think, what does that color evoke? Now you have to be culturally sensitive about the colors. But once you've corrected for that, and then you talk about, well, what's underlying this? And somebody might say, well, you didn't think about this. And if you're talking about importing biofuel from Brazil, for example, what happens in Brazil? What's the relationship with Brazil? So then you start to negotiate, you know, now we're connecting the region to Brazil. So there's an obvious link there, and you start to negotiate that link. Or you're thinking about doing it right here, but it's the exercise of, and the other nice thing is, as I said, you can add more data to it, and you just throw it into the table, and there's a calculation for coming up with the compass at the end. So people's voices can be heard. You know, if somebody says, hey, you know, you missed something out, this is really important for us. And you say, okay, we put it in the table, but now we have to discuss how important is it really, given everything else that's going on. So these are long discussions. Yaman will confirm that we spend, you know, sometimes several hours on one data point, discussing what does it mean? What is, you know, how does this work out? What's the significance of this thing? And when people give you a statistic, it's to show you that there's something significant going on. They don't just rattle statistics out for no reason. It's usually to evoke some sort of emotion, that everything is going the way that it should be, and don't, you know, shut up, stop complaining, or there's something really exciting going on, or there's something really depressing going on, or something really hard, and we have to react to that. Yes, thank you for that question, because it drew out all of those bits I couldn't explain during the talk.
Yeah, it has a lot of uses, and that's what I was thinking too. I could only like pull a couple of them together, but it's a good research tool, as well as a mediation tool, as well as a teaching tool. I mean, it's got a lot going in that, because it's simple visually too. Anyway, and it takes data as well. That's all real cool. Thanks. Talk more.
Thank you so much, Michèle. Very interesting presentation.